Some say the trouble's in the Pentagon. Some say the trouble's in the street. Some say the president's a paragon. Where's the trouble?
Hi, welcome to Human Rights Here Now. My name is Lynn Dunton, and today we're going to be talking about KUSP and the future of this public radio station here in the Central Coast. Today I have with me Brad Kava, former editor of The Patch, currently the Good Times news editor. I have Susan Freeman, an educator and author and a longtime producer of various KUSP programs, both as host and as a producer. And we also have Ed Porter, former city council member and activist within the Santa Cruz community. Welcome. Let me kind of summarize the situation at this point as I understand it. Currently, KUSP Board of Directors has signed a letter of intent to sell the license and the radio station, the equipment, to the classical public music broadcast system, thereby basically making KUSP go away for all practical purposes. Currently, KUSP is carrying about $750,000 in debt, which is the main reason for this sale, and the sale would help wipe out that debt with a little left over, I guess. The station had been running in the red for the last few years and had made some changes a while back to where most of this debt, the bulk of it, is associated with licensing programming from NPR. And now they're looking to sell all these things, and basically we'd end up losing a lot of the local programming that we have currently. Some of our well-beloved programs, for me personally, Dr. Don and Geek Speak and the Latin Quarter, are all programs that I think would be sorely missed, and they're all done locally by volunteers. So anyway, I first throw that out to you and see if I've left anything out in particular, or if I've misstated something, or if I need to add something into there.
I'd like to comment about that because I believe you said that the board had signed this letter, and that's not exactly accurate. They did vote, and this is what was so terrifying to the community. On May 4th, they voted to empower the administration to enter into this, to sign the letter of intent that came from Classical Radio in Los Angeles. But we believe, because of the efforts of people in the community and our group that we formed called KUSP Forward, that they have held off on signing that. And it turns out there was some secret code that nobody knew about in this proposed agreement that said once they signed it, they couldn't talk to anybody else except the organization in Los Angeles. So they wouldn't have been able to have these public meetings. They wouldn't have been able to tell us anything. They wouldn't have been able to listen to what we had to say. And so many of us think really a bullet was dodged, that thing was not signed. However, it's still on the table. They still have a letter of intent from Classical Radio in Los Angeles that says they want to enter into an exclusive negotiation to purchase the transmitter, the station licenses, and the broadcast equipment. And that would be the end of KUSP for all practical purposes. So we've, at every public meeting and in every board of directors meeting since that time, there's been about 8 of them, we've asked them, please say that option is off the table, at least for now. You can bring it back later. And it doesn't seem that there's much doubt that if they say, no, we don't want to talk about that right now, that it could come back if it had to for some reason. But we've made the point very emphatically that the people who were appointed to this board were not appointed to the board for the purpose of selling the station. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge problem in our community.
Okay. Anything else should be added to that summary that I had?
No, I think, Ed, you framed it pretty well. Where we are right now, I think, is in a process of sorting through various plans that have been proposed by different constituencies from within the station and outside the station to come up with an alternative to the idea of selling the station. And those seem to be changing fairly rapidly. The proposals that were put forward have been, some have been selected, some have been tabled, and there are different entities involved. A group that has come together as a community leadership group to review the possibility of several different proposals and to look at the financial situation from its own perspective and make some suggestions of what direction would best serve the station. And there has been an outside analyst brought in by the station from connected with Public Media Company, who has taken a look very seriously at all the financials and come up with an alternative plan built in part on the KUSP forward proposal and in part on what the staff and board have proposed and others. So I think that things are making progress in a more positive vein than they were, say, a week or two ago. But we still are up in the air with it.
Yes.
Well, one more thing that you didn't have in there, and that is that last Monday somebody donated $100,000 to keep the station going. They keep talking about there being a short runway between when the debt comes due and how long they can operate, and this gave them a little bit more time to negotiate and to be at the point where they don't feel they have to declare bankruptcy.
Now, if this classical radio system takes over KUSP's frequency and so forth, it would completely do away with all local programming at that point. They have no intention.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. Susan, you were a long-time producer and host on KUSP. If you could go a little bit into what the original intent and mission and history of KUSP, I think that would be of interest to our people viewing.
Well, reaching back into memory, I personally go back to 1977, the station, spring of 1977. I started working as a programmer, as a volunteer. And at that time, KUSP was about 5 years old and had been founded really as a community station. The intent was to really focus on providing a voice for the community to reflect the culture and the needs, the public affairs needs of the area here in Santa Cruz. Originally, the station broadcast just to the local area. And over the years, we began developing the capacity to go beyond Santa Cruz, down into Monterey County, to Los Gatos, and all the way down to Big Sur. And that has expanded over the years.
How many repeaters does KUSP have at this point?
Right now, I think there's two, maybe
Two?
three.
Okay.
We no longer have the San Ardo repeater.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the thing that really marked KUSP was a particular sense of being in this place at a certain time. And I came across a letter that had been written. This goes back to 2008. But a letter was written at that time to the station manager, Terry Green, about proposed changes to increase the amount of NPR programming. And one of the things in this letter was a citation from the very first brochure that was published in 1972 by KUSP. And if I could just read a bit from this, it says, "There's a strange, wonderful sound that you make with your life, a certain pulse that flows through your daily activities, and every place has its own unique rhythms and energies generated by the contours of its land, the fluctuations of that place, and the interests of its people." And that's the sound of this life around us, in and around Santa Cruz, that we want to find with our microphone and send back to you, amplified and intense. So that was, I suppose, the original mission statement or vision statement of KUSP. The current mission statement is nowhere near as colorful, but it reads, if I can.
Sure.
KUSP is an independent, community-based, nonprofit, interactive multimedia voice serving the greater Monterey Bay area. We inform, engage, and entertain our community by providing a thoughtful mix of news, public affairs, arts, and music programming. A bit of the spirit of that original statement has been removed, I think. And in the process, the kind of strange, wonderful sound and the unique rhythms and energies that that original statement refers to has been also drained out of KUSP. And one of the things that I think many people in the community are now saying is we want not necessarily to go back to the 1970s, that's not what we're looking for. We want to preserve what has become really a very strong air presence and a sound that sounds professional, but we don't want to do it at the expense of that commitment to the community and to voicing what the community is all about, the whole range of the community, not just one segment of it.
In terms of the mission statement you just read for the foundation, what are their plans? If they were to go through with this sale, do they have any plan of what they would do after that? It just sounds like they're gone. They can't be a multi-media station without having the major portion of their media there.
I would call some of those plans, I want to say this in a kind way, but I think the plans for getting rid of this frequency are fantasy. And in fact, the people who have voiced these plans say things like, well, look at our new mission statement, we're a media company. And by the way, conspicuously missing from that new vision statement, if you can call it a vision statement, the word radio is gone. Now, when you operate, quote, a media company that has uses a tower on Mount Toro and beams to the entire Monterey Bay area, and you choose not to call that radio, there's a mistake underway, and an ongoing mistake. I think something that needs to change is that radio needs to come back. This is the centerpiece of what this company does. But they apparently think, well, we'll do internet streaming and we'll do podcasts and we'll keep the use of our record library. And I have to interject. I just had an experience where another radio station on Monterey Bay thought that exact same thing. And that was a radio station, an AM station called KRXA that I was involved with. And the owner developed the idea that the station could do just as well by selling the station again to a Los Angeles organization, and he did that. And now the remnants of the station is streaming, and I have yet to encounter a soul in Santa Cruz who listens to it. Not one person. And I don't know, I'm just curious, does anybody here listen to KRXA or the remnants of KRXA streaming?
No, but there's an interesting history to that at KUSP. Back in 2008 again, when there was a proposed change to shift to greater satellite feed programming, mostly from NPR. And that was done in response to a major effort to try to combine forces with KAZU down in Monterey in order to preserve the best of both stations, as KAZU was really kind of in free fall. That negotiation process failed, collapsed. And so KUSP had to regroup. And one of the decisions was, or one of the proposed decisions was, to essentially go head-to-head with KZU and do what they did, only better, and take on more NPR programming and severely reduce the amount of local programming, so that many programmers were let go, many locally generated and produced programs disappeared from the air in 2008. Part of the rationale behind that came from surveys and conversations with people in the community of listener supporters of KUSP. These were not surveys of the broader community, but they were surveys of KUSP listeners. And the demographics there had changed radically within a number of years, so that many of the people who were polled in these surveys wanted their radio on demand. They wanted to be able to stream. They wanted to be able to download podcasts. And they wanted to be able to do it when they chose to do it. My program, the children's program, Castle Cottage, was one of the programs that actually was given an option to stream rather than to be live. And that seemed to contradict, to me, the kind of program that I had created over the years, where it was possible to have a lot of live, on-the-spot, spontaneous broadcasting. So there's a history to that being, I think, justified as a reflection of what the community wanted, and most certainly as a reflection of what was happening nationally in radio media. So that if you look across the country, almost every major station now has capacity to stream, the whole generation of podcasts and so on and so forth. So it's not a freak thing, but it most certainly changed the nature of KUSP.
Yeah. And, the thing that, this consolidation of media, with the loss of the Patch and with the fact that the Sentinel is losing weight at an alarming pace at this point in time, the combination of the Metro and the Good Times, it just seems like there's less and less local going on, and that with this sale, it will once again almost dissipate. We'd lose almost all local sort of radio for sure, and then certainly there's CTV, but we're not in the same league as KUSP in terms of the listenership or certainly some of the great programs you have. For me personally, I think it would be a shame to lose it at this point. But the question is, how do we get the community to support this in a way that will help us maintain it? Because private donations, but we need a groundswell of people to sort of come up and support this. In terms of the Patch, I get the impression there was a lot of local support for that, and that it was mainly the mother organization was the one that sort of collapsed after that, which took you out at the same time.
Yeah.
What was your experience with hyper-local media on the net?
Well, I think it's much needed on the net and in radio. I feel like KUSP, we've already lost it. The minute they went so much NPR, we lost what was essentially a local radio station, we were duplicating what you hear on Kazoo. Yeah. So why tune in to hear NPR on two stations? So I think that was the start of the loss. Now, to their defense, what they would say is they're listener-supported radio. The listeners wanted NPR, that's what they would pay for. And that brings a big question. Would they support local programming? I believe they would. I believe, as we've seen in these meetings now, people would really rally for that if they had local shows, local talk shows, things that they're not getting on NPR, things that they're not getting in other media. And I think there's a real market for it. The question bears whether the economy will support it. You need people to contribute. I believe they will with the right push. And I think with a certain amount of transparency. The station, KSP, never talks about their problems. There's no talk shows to say, hey, we need this money, we need this, come help us. They have their drives every so often, but there's really no transparency, no feel from the community didn't realize how bad off they were until they were way over their heads. Yeah. And I think that if we had these good local shows like Talk of the Bay and the things we used to have there where people could phone in shows, talk about our community, there's a need for it, and I think that the community would support it.
In 2008, the station actually held a couple of, I don't remember exactly how they were built, but they were open format call-in programs for people to comment on the changes that the station was proposing to make. And they went on, I think each one for an hour, and a lot of people called in. And the idea was that the board and station management was then going to listen very carefully to what people were saying, take that under consideration as they made the decisions. My memory is that a lot of the people who called in said loud and clear, we want to keep the local presence of KUSP alive. We don't want all NPR or mostly NPR. And yet, when the decision came down, that was the direction that they went in. And I've often wondered if it didn't have something to do with donors and who was willing to support a station that became more local and who wasn't. Because we do have a donor base that includes large donations during the fund drives. There will be people who will pledge $2,000 or $1,000 or $500 for a certain period of time if people call in and match those funds. And I'm curious what demographic supports the donorship, and what is their definition of media? Is it community radio with a much more local perspective, or is it keep the NPR, we want that big sound?
The board says, based on what they saw donated and when people donated the most, it was during the NPR shows. So that was what they used to make their determination. That's what people wanted to pay for. And that's I don't know how we change that, but.
Yeah, I only donate during Dr. Don and Geek
there you
Speak.
go.
That's the only time I donate at this point in time. Is there any support on the board for having more transparency to bringing this to the public? You know, the only place where I've actually was made aware of this issue was in the Sentinel. It wasn't on KUSP. It wasn't anywhere else. It was, you know, and then I go on the net and I find the website for KUSP Forward, and I see that there, but, you know, I don't see it anywhere else. So
I would have to say the board has been very quiet on this subject. I was not a regular attender of their board meetings until May 4th, and now I've been to 5 of them since that date. And I don't believe the board members have ever made a single motion during that 6 or 8 weeks. It worries me a little bit that the board, you know, maybe someone on the board will watch and say, oh, we should be more active. I hope they would be, because having sat on the city council, I know that the chemistry of the city council is such that someone makes a motion, someone seconds it, or maybe nobody seconds it and it dies for lack of a second, but as soon as it's seconded, you get a lot of discussion. And you hear the pros and cons, and you learn the merits and the negative side of an action that's contemplated. And that's very valuable. Whether you pass that motion or not becomes almost less important than the discussion that follows. And none of that has been evident at these board of directors meetings that I've attended. So it worries me a little bit that they're hearing what the best course of action is from the CEO and the president of the board, and that's accepted. They had a special meeting of the board of directors at Loudon Nelson Community Center this past Monday, and frankly, it was an exciting event for the community, I would have to say. They had scheduled one of the small rooms that holds 49 people, and there's 13 people on the board, there's staff, and room for maybe 20 spectators. And it was pretty clear that there was about 50 people outside the door that couldn't get in. And fortunately, the large room at Loudon Nelson was available, and they made a last-minute change and went in there. Well, that large room got filled up with what some people say is around 200 people altogether. And I'll have to say, I appreciate that the board deferred to this big crowd, and they allowed them in oral communications to speak for a little over 2 hours. And unanimously, this group from the public was courteous and upbeat and had positive suggestions. One man got up and said, I will pledge $5,000 right now if you pledge to keep this a community station. And no one went and got his name, and maybe they'll find a way to call him, I don't know. But lots of people said, I will do programming, I will volunteer. One guy said, I will sweep the floor, I'll stay all night, I'll turn the lights on and off, I'll, you know, you name it, everything was covered. And it was an inspiring community event. Very, very positive. And yet, on the board, no one made a comment about that except for the president of the board. And I thought she was defensive about, we did everything right, we have done what we needed to do, we've done nothing wrong. things like that. We're going to keep going the way we are. We have a fiduciary responsibility to, frankly, editorial comment to what, I don't know, but they have a fiduciary responsibility to keep the sale viable, and they're going to extend the option 90 days, the option to do that. I am disappointed, and I don't understand why the groundswell of community support has appeared. It has shown evidence. Excuse me. And yet, the organization doesn't seem to want to embrace it. And I think that's the biggest task before us in the community right now, is to say to the management and the president of the board, pay attention to this community, because it has stood up and said, we want to keep this station local, we want to support it, we will help in every way we possibly can, partner with us, and we don't have an answer to that offer yet.
You mentioned the board meeting several times. When is the next board meeting?
It's the 29th of June, I believe.
29th,
Yes.
and where's
Last
that held?
Monday.
Out Loud in Nelson
Yeah.
Center, I believe
Yeah.
at 6 p.m.
6 p.m.
We will
Okay.
KUSP Forward will publicize it as widely as we can.
Okay. Because, you know, that's one of the things I found out, a lot of this information about the board meetings and about the meetings for KUSP Forward after the fact, you know, or just, you know, it's happening tonight and I can't make it tonight. So, you know.
We're
being-
going to have to put you on our list.
Well, you know, one of the things that I do want to say is that at that meeting last Monday night, we did hear from the board some talk about how they really did not want to sell the station. And it was a little contradictory when, towards the end of the meeting, the board president reiterated this sense of, in order to fulfill the fiduciary responsibility of the board and her particular responsibility, that they were keeping on the table the potential of this letter of intent and the possible sale. So it's very hard to know really which way the board is leaning on this thing. They can say, well, you know, we really don't want to sell the station. We've got all these proposals we're considering, you know, as an alternate to that, and then to keep on the table, you know, the possibility of selling. But another thing that became apparent to me at the meeting last Monday was a difference between the possible definition of community radio and local radio. So the people in the community were talking about local radio and wanting to, as each person came up to speak, they reiterated their commitment to keeping KUSP local. The board did the same thing, but I started to think, wait a minute, I think we're speaking two languages here. I'm not quite sure what local means to each group. And it seems that would be a useful question to ask, is how are we defining that? The idea of community radio is vitally different from what's come to be called public radio. And I've watched that transition from the community radio that KUSP was years ago, where it was volunteer run, supported by individuals within the community, and some donors, but no huge money.
Yeah.
And where it really did reflect the geographic communities and the interests of the communities in a much more tangible way. Back then, we called it community radio. It became public radio in the early mid-1980s when KUSP began to purchase programming from NPR. And the NPR programming came in originally, you know, for a very, I think, positive reason, which was to increase the possibility of some of the programmers getting a chance to air their amazing programs nationally. KUSP is the home of the Kitchen Sisters. That was the starting place for what has now become a stalwart NPR program. Nikki Silva and Davia Nelson started that as kind of an experiment at KUSP. And as part of an attempt to put that out to a larger audience, the idea of reaching out to NPR, which was a very different entity in 1982 or 84, and making possible that kind of networking and interchange between local programs and a national network had a certain merit. And I don't think in those days, in 1984, when we shifted into NPR, there was any sense that at some point in time NPR would essentially take over the majority of the program.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, which I really hadn't thought about before. You know, in my own mind, maybe I hadn't thought about it very well, but you know, public radio and local radio sort of was confused in my own mind. But you know, but when you actually think about local radio, you want to hear about things that are happening from people in the community and things that are going on locally, and using the expertise and the experience of those people. Whereas, you know, NPR gives you a very, you know, it's a very national exposure. It's a very, you know, it's an alternative to, you know, other, you know, broadcast media at this point, but it doesn't give you anything local. It basically subtracts the local from it. It is another sort of aspect of the consolidation of media, if you will. It is another source where things are sort of homogenized across the entire nation, leaving out the local portion of it. So that's a, you know, that's a distinction which, you know, I'm glad you brought up, that really brings home to me the need to keep this this option open at this point. In terms of the streaming, what was you turned down the option to stream the Castle Cottage. Could you go into that a little bit more about why you decided to do that?
Well, I thought about it for a while, and I realized what it would entail for me. For some reason, when I did a program live, even if I had the air room full of kids, I often had youth theater groups or kids who had written things or were going to read their writing on the air or perform. Or for 2 years, we had a group of elementary school kids who literally did a news program once a month and broadcast a 15, 20-minute news program from children's perspectives on the show. I knew that when I did that live, I came in on Saturday morning, sat down at the board, started to go, everything had to flow very spontaneously. And when I had to produce a program in the production room and sit there with a tape recorder and talk, or not a tape recorder anymore, but a digital recorder, and put the thing on the digital system, for some reason, I gave myself permission to correct mistakes, to stop the recording, to go in there. And over the years, I realized it took me 3 hours to broadcast a 1-hour program. And I thought, or to produce a 1-hour program. And I thought, this is nuts. And I knew that there was another factor involved. The management at KUSP was really pushing to professionalize the sound at KUSP. That's fine. I like a good sound of radio. I cut my teeth at KPFK in Los Angeles, a Pacifica station, which had a very professional sound. But there was something kind of strange about having to go into the production studio at KUSP, which is the size of a rather large phone box. It does not fit too many people. And it really doesn't lend itself to the kind of programming that I was doing. And so I thought, the arrangement of streaming is not going to afford Castle Cottage a professional production. It's not going to make possible the kind of production that is essential to the spirit and nature of the program. And I decided it's not worth it.
Okay. The proposal for selling the license, so forth, I guess, I understand that there's also a forest of proposals that are out there, that there's been 11 alternatives proposed, all with tree names such as spruce, poplar, chestnut, and a variety of others which I can't remember. What are some of the alternatives that have been proposed or by staff and by KUSP Forward?
3 of those tree alternatives involve basically getting rid of the transmitter in the very large footprint. And I wanted to comment a couple minutes ago about what KUSP is when the subject of local versus community came up. We ought to pay attention to what KUSP is physically. KUSP, the biggest part of it is a transmitter on the top of a tower on Mount Toro to the northeast of Salinas. So we need to realize that that's a big thing, that's an important thing, and that if you were to take that away or sell it to someone else and then say, okay, let's pick up the pieces and what could we do now as a radio station? Well, there's only one option that's been discussed, and that's incorporated into 3 of these tree plans that we're talking about. And that is to get the use of a frequency that's owned by a local nonprofit here, then they're not using it right now, to apparently negotiate a contract with them and say, we want to go on the air with this frequency. Then some assumptions that most of the people at KUSP Forward acknowledge are wrong, and that is that you could go on the air tomorrow with this frequency. Well, there's some facts involved here. And one of them is there used to be a tower for that frequency, and that tower has been dismantled. Now, what would that mean? Well, that would mean that if you wanted to go back with the same capability of that frequency, and that would be to cover most of the footprint of the city of Santa Cruz, not the far east
Barely.
fringe. But
So you'd
certainly
lose
not
a large part of Santa Cruz County.
With like the west, no, not the county.
Oh, okay.
The city.
The city.
Yeah, only
It
the
would-
city.
the west side
would be
Yeah, but
primarily.
you would, that's what, I mean, you'd lose
And-
That's right.
the county per se.
Well,
So
and
you-
you'd lose Monterey and San
Yeah.
Benito
Yeah,
counties
you'd lose
too.
Aptos, you'd lose everything south of Santa Cruz, you'd lose San Benito County, you'd lose Monterey County, you'd lose Big Sur, you'd lose King City. All of those are covered right now. And what's the reason for doing this? Well, to pay off some debt and to get into the black, apparently. And then come back to the tower question again. In Santa Cruz County, you would have to go and get a permit to build a new tower. And you have to think about, well, how long would that take, and could you really do it? And I don't know, maybe we should take a vote. How many people think we could get a new tower built anytime soon in Santa Cruz County?
Define soon.
But
I'd
it's
say
not worth
5
it
to 7
because
years, maybe.
Yeah, and frankly,
Yeah.
there's radio professionals that say it would never happen. It just could never happen. Times have changed. So there could be a low power broadcast on that frequency, and it just would get downtown Santa Cruz and maybe some of the west side and a little bit of the east side. Virtually nothing compared to the spread of KUSP today. So I come at this looking at what is KUSP today, who does it talk to, and that's the community that I'm talking about. This is a Monterey Bay community. And I think it's just foolhardy to imagine that we throw away 90% of the people who can currently listen to KUSP and say that doesn't matter, and we'll somehow proceed with this little teeny radio station that just covers the middle of the city of Santa Cruz.
But
It's
do you know
folly.
which tree proposal that one is?
The one that
With the
sells,
low powered, yeah.
There's 3 of them with that in it.
yeah, there's 3 of
And
them.
Oh, they got
if that's
3
even a current
It's
one.
all
And basically, they've said that they're reducing from the 11 possibilities. They've distilled and they've mixed some together, and now they have 3 which are not even named as near as I know. And nor were they discussed. They were on the agenda to be discussed at the last board meeting, and they were not discussed at all. So I don't know exactly what they're talking about. And then to reassure us, they said, in addition to those 3, we do want to talk to KUSP Forward, and we like the fact that you guys have this active and live proposal, and Rachel Goodman has done a budget and done numbers, a pro forma. So really there's a lot of meat on the bones of this idea that we put forward, but it's not clear what they're going to do. That's the biggest problem.
What is the proposal that KUSP Forward has put forward?
It's been called the Spruce Proposal.
Okay.
And we have it also online at the KUSP Forward website. I believe it's kuspforward.weebly.com, and the full text is there in a PDF file, unlike what's on the KUSP website has been rewritten, reorganized, the words have been changed. Other than that, it's the same.
Yeah. Basically, we're calling for a return to consideration of more volunteer people on the staff, rather than carrying a larger paid staff, and having more volunteer programmers, so that we really cut back severely on the amount of the national programming. We're proposing to keep Morning Edition and All Things Considered, because those are really anchors, and they do seem to really reflect what the community wants. There are other public affairs programs that are now part of a national feed that would also be considered, but the majority of the programs would be produced here in the community by people who have expertise. And I would just want to clarify one thing too, because I think there's a notion on the part of perhaps some board members that when we talk about a volunteer station or community station, that what we're really talking about is kind of like the good old hippie days of the 1970s, when everybody just played lots of reggae and you know, didn't really know what they were doing. I want to remind everyone listening that KUSP's programmers are experts in their field. There are people who broadcast music programs on KUSP who have years and years of experience in that particular genre of music. There are incredible public affairs programs, literary programs, the Poetry Show, which is the oldest running poetry show in the entire United States. These programs are professional quality, they're incredibly well done, and they are admired beyond Santa Cruz. These kind of programs would continue, and more could be added in. So there isn't the proposal that we just open KUSP up and have anybody who thinks, oh, I'd like to do a radio show in there. We actually would make sure that there would be a quality sound, but it would be a sound generated by volunteers more than it would be by National Public Radio.
In terms, in your proposal, how do you handle the debt issue?
You know, that's an area that hasn't had a lot of discussion yet, but I've done projections of how I think the debt should be handled, and I'm really glad you brought that up. You know, $730,000 is a lot of money. I'm glad I don't owe that money, and I'm sure we all are. But when you compare it to the average size of a home mortgage in Santa Cruz County, it's not so gigantic anymore.
It's about the current sales price of a home in Santa Cruz.
That's right. So, and KUSP boasts a list of some 3,500 donors. So I decided I would project what would it take to get rid of this debt. And I was surprised how little it would take. For example, if all 3,500 donors participated in the retirement of the debt, and I think now that we've declared an emergency and said we want to keep the station, will you help? Lots of people have said, yes, I will. If that's typically a household, 3,500 households. If they each paid $2.91 a month, it could be retired in 7 years. And I've got projections for 4 years, for 3 years, and so forth. And if you just combine that with operating expenses, maybe the amount would be doubled, but it's a very modest amount of money to keep this station going. And it's just a question of, will we do some effective fundraising to get back on a financially even keel? The station has chosen not to. In fact, the last fundraiser, I don't know if any of you remember, but they had this sort of we have this new stylish fundraiser where we're not going to run it for very long. We're just going to tell you... Fast track, yes. We're going to tell you at the beginning of the hour that this is a fundraiser. We hope all of the people who usually donate will do so, but we won't talk about it very much. And then we'll end it very quickly, and they did. And by the way, the station's in debt. And by the way, we're not making positive cash flow every month. I have to think that the fast track is a bit of a mistake. We need to do fundraising until the funds are raised. In fact, I would like to see a change in the bylaws of the corporation that say you cannot operate in the red. That in fact, you raise the money every month that you spend. It just seems like common sense, but that's not what the rules are.
How much, how long have they been running in the red? And
Well, that's an interesting thing. I actually asked a question to try to get a sense of that at the meeting last Monday. And the treasurer of the board said that the station's been running in the red for 10 or 15 years. And I found that astounding. It most certainly isn't the way a business would run, or they wouldn't be a business anymore.
That's why they're a nonprofit.
Right.
they're definitely
done their best.
They're definitely a
It's
nonprofit.
kind of the way the United States government operates, and we keep building the debt and saying it doesn't matter.
Well, somebody's got to look at what they're spending, and that is they're spending $400,000 on salaries, including 70 to Terry, 70 to an engineer, the rest to consultants and programmers and engineers. Another $400,000 to NPR is what they owe.
That's right.
They pay $60,000 a year for their beautiful studio, which that's something that kind of sticks in my craw because you could broadcast out of a cardboard box, basically, and or if they'd only have bought a place 10 years ago, they would have made more on the rent, you
Right.
know,
Well,
but they didn't do that.
You can't blame that on this board.
No,
or
no,
on
I'm
this
just saying-
station manager. That actually was
Right.
the problem of another station
But in
manager.
hindsight, if only they had done that, because $60,000 a rent, which they said was affordable for a beautiful studio, I'm not sure you need a beautiful studio. KKUP in Cupertino is a successful station, been around as long as this, and has no pay. Everybody works for free. It's all volunteer. And they have amazing pledge drives too that are, say, a whole weekend of reggae with live people and a whole weekend of blues, bringing in acts. And they raise their money, and they're not in debt.
Yeah.
So and I don't know. We didn't have some vision for that. I think in hindsight, it's easy to criticize them, but it's a failure. They're operating now at $200,000 a year in debt.
And to be borrowing at the same time, which has happened, so that it just perpetuates the cycle and makes it almost inescapable to get
And
out
there's a
of
sad part of that too. You mentioned earlier that they sold a facility in San Ardo which they used as a repeater. That's a complete radio station that they sold. I really wish I would have been living in San Ardo and would have known about that.
I mean, it had broadcast booths and
It had everything, and
Yeah.
in fact, I believe it's on the air now as a radio station. And they sold a repeater that was in Los Gatos. They said, well, that's not doing anything for us. Maybe not, but it certainly could do something for KUSP. And so I'm reminded of a farmer who wants to put food on his table Friday evening, so he puts his seed corn on the table. It's wrong.
Has KUSP had any, Ford have any contact with NPR in terms of the chunk of debt that the station currently owes them for licensing?
We talked a lot about doing that. However, there's some facts to be faced here, and that is that we know that the CEO of KUSP, Terry Green, is talking to them on a weekly basis. And so we have no standing to talk to them. We can't make a proposal to them unless we form a more elaborate organization. And we are not KUSP, so we can't speak for KUSP. And so as long as Terry has the keys, he's the guy who has to talk to NPR, and we believe he's doing that. And frankly, from the reports that we hear at the board meeting, there's some encouraging signs that maybe there could be negotiations about this debt. I certainly can't speak for any numbers, but I would just have to say that it's very
So
encouraging.
there's been no reporting at the board meetings about these
Just in
talks?
general like
not
that.
recently, but my understanding, and I may be wrong about this, is that there's the possibility of NPR negotiating something around the debt as long as KUSP retains a certain amount of NPR programming.
Okay.
So if we let go of all the NPR programming, we essentially let go of the possibility of that negotiation, and the debt will come due, boom, all at once. And so I think that's one of the reasons why there, in some of these proposals, there's been this attempt to balance the NPR program and keep a little bit in there, even in the KUSP Forward, as a way of getting some leverage and ensuring that we don't have to come due with that enormous NPR debt all at once.
You talked about the donor base and the 3,500 donors locally. Is that all individual family households, or is that the mix of both business and individual households? And the question I'm sort of driving at is, what is the support that KUSP is getting from the local business community at this point in time? Because, I sort of assume that they probably have deeper pockets in the individual households, and that it's also important to them to have a local radio too. I mean, we may not be doing advertisements per se for them, but it should be important to them also. And since they, hopefully all live here, most likely they do, that would be important to them.
Well,
Go ahead.
one of the problems is they've been competing with KAZU, which has been undercutting their sponsorships, taking less money. So they don't have advertising per se; they have sponsorships.
Yes,
it's
I
the
understand.
same thing. It's with it's virtually the same thing. And Kazoo has been undercutting, underbidding, taking cheaper prices. So you hear a lot of Santa Cruz businesses on the Monterey station.
Right. And it makes it very difficult for KUSP to compete, because we don't have the kind of donor base that they've got at KAZU to support that kind of reduced rate on getting businesses to sponsor programs.
But I tend to make a little bit of a counterpoint about that, and it's when you listen to KUSP around the clock, like I do, you hear the names of the underraters on every single program, and there's a lot of them. I started to make a list because this question has come up, and after I filled one side of an envelope and turned it over and filled the other side of the envelope, I thought, I'm not sure there's any point in making this list. It's almost like every business in Santa Cruz. So I tend to view the shortfall of money slightly differently. And the way that I view it is, this community is fully capable, and I think I've demonstrated it in all these spreadsheets, fully capable of supporting this station and has a desire to do it. It's just that the message has not been communicated. And the fact that this problem has not been on the air on KUSP is stark. And here we are doing this conversation on community television, which is wonderful. We really need to thank community television for doing this. But they're filling a void, an absence that KUSP has not even noticed. And I guess I should say in their defense, they think, well, we don't want to scare our donors. They've said that. I understand that. The time has passed when you worry about scaring the donors when it's on the front page of the Sentinel and it is the subject of a couple of DeCenzo cartoons. It's time to talk about it. And the time has come, we're talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you've signed a letter of intent or are about to sign a letter of intent where the station would in effect disappear, scaring your donors should be your last. You should scare your donors at that point.
Originally I think there was hope that the donors wouldn't necessarily know about that until something would be worked out. But there is a kind of on-air etiquette about what you say and what you don't say about the station's finances. And this is true not just at KUSP, but if a station is in distress, you try to kind of keep a cover on that. You don't want to alarm the donors who are already contributing. And the truth is that when I listen to KZU, which I do once in a while, I notice a lot of Santa Cruz businesses sponsoring programs on KAZU, not on KUSP. So they're picking up, there's some kind of flight from the local area to KAZU because they figured perhaps that's a more competitive field for them.
Yeah. We all know, we've all heard cliches about too much of a good thing isn't a good thing anymore. And apparently the NPR was a good thing in moderation several years ago. But if you go to the website and look up the program schedule For KUSP, it's graphically depicted, and you see it a whole week on one screen, and you see this rectangle of your computer screen or your TV screen, and prominently in the center of that screen, covering all the weekdays from, I believe,
5 in the
5
morning
in the
till
morning
6 at night,
till
or
6 at
7
night.
at night.
There's this huge orange square that covers probably 90% of the KUSP programming schedule is all NPR.
Yeah,
And
With a few
more on
few
Saturday.
exceptions,
I
but
looked
not
at it
local.
just before we came on today, and I thought it started like, well, there's BBC broadcasting that starts at 2 a.m. and then from 2 a.m. up until about 7 o'clock, as I recall.
I think you're looking at KZU.
Okay, KZU, really? But
For us, BBC comes in at 1 o'clock,
oh, okay.
from 1 to 3.
Maybe I was looking at the wrong one,
Yeah.
but it looked like what you were saying was this huge chunk of programming.
Yeah.
That was right there in the
So
middle.
to do the spruce plan or the KUSP forward plan, we could start nibbling away at it in a transition and just take a couple hours every afternoon and start adding more local programming back in. And over a period of time, it's not as though somebody's going to throw a switch and say, okay, you're limited to 2 hours of NPR programming a day. It's rather going to be that over a period of about 4 months, there must be a graceful transition, one bite at a time, one program at a time. So I asked Susan the other day, would you like to bring back your program? And she's the first one that I've talked to that said yes. So there's lots more
Maybe.
like her.
Yeah. Well, our time is just about up at this point, and I want to thank you all for being here today and talking about what I think is, a very important issue for the community and for, for each of us individually, about having that local voice, which, seems to be, quickly disappearing, and a lot of what we've talked about today has resonated within the CTV community. So I want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you for
Thank
inviting
you.
me.
And I want to thank you all for watching Human Rights Here Now. Tune in to us next week when we'll have a new program.
Some say the trouble's in the Pentagon.
Go ahead and talk.
Some say the trouble's in the street. Some say the president's a paragon. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Some say the trouble's the anatomy. Some say the trouble's in the head. Some say the trouble's the psychology. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Trouble, trouble, where's the trouble? Oh mama, where's the trouble? Got a headache, seeing double. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Trouble, trouble, where's the trouble? Oh mama, where's the trouble? Got a headache, seeing double. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Some say the trouble's with the principal. Some say the trouble's with the kids. Some say the trouble's the curriculum. Where's the trouble at the bottom? Some say the trouble's in the textbook. Some say the trouble's in the class. Overall, the school board fugging up. Where's the trouble at the bottom?